I had always thought that Emily and I were the kind of couple who would grow old together. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, comfortable, predictable, and deeply entwined. I spent my days managing my real estate business while Emily stayed home, tending to our house and garden. She had insisted on hiring someone to help with the gardening after our house remodel left her too busy organizing the interiors. That's how we ended up with Marco, a young, good-looking gardener who quickly became a regular presence on our property. At first, I thought nothing of it. Marco was polite and hard-working, keeping the grounds immaculate. Emily seemed thrilled with how beautiful the garden was turning out. It made me happy to see her so engaged, taking pride in her work alongside Marco. But then, little things began to shift. Emily's behavior changed. She started spending more time outdoors, claiming it was to supervise Marco's work. She'd come back inside flushed and radiant, her laughter trailing behind her like perfume. Our evenings, once filled with easy conversation, grew quieter. Emily seemed distracted, her phone always within arm's reach. It wasn't until I overheard a hushed conversation on the patio one evening that the seed of doubt was planted. I wasn't eavesdropping. Well, not intentionally, but I heard Marco's voice followed by Emily's laughter. I peeked out the window and saw them sitting close, their faces illuminated by the golden light of sunset. The way Emily leaned into him, her hand brushing his arm, it wasn't the casual camaraderie of employer and employee. I decided not to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was imagining things, projecting my insecurities. But the gnawing suspicion lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. One morning, I left for the office later than usual. Emily had mentioned she'd be out running errands, so the house should have been empty. As I reversed out of the driveway, I caught sight of her car parked discreetly behind the house, almost hidden from view. My chest tightened. I made an excuse to head back inside. As I walked through the foyer, I heard voices upstairs, low, urgent murmurs. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept up the stairs, the sound of my pulse drowning out everything else. What I found would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. As I reached the top of the stairs, the voices became clearer. I heard Emily laugh, a soft, breathless sound that felt like a punch to the gut. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, and sunlight streamed through the crack, illuminating a sliver of the floor. I pushed the door open slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and walk away. But I couldn't. I had to know. And there they were. Emily was on the bed, her hands clutching Marco's shoulders as he leaned over her. The sheets were tangled, and the room was filled with the unmistakable tension of their closeness. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart felt like it had stopped, and my legs turned to lead. Then, they noticed me. Emily gasped, shoving Marco off her and scrambling to cover herself with the sheet. Marco froze, his face pale as he stammered something incoherent. But I wasn't looking at him. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Emily. The shame and guilt in her expression hit me harder than any words ever could. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't what it looks like." I let out a harsh laugh, the sound foreign even to my own ears. "Not what it looks like. Emily, you're in our bed. With him." I jabbed a finger toward Marco, who looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Emily clutched the sheet tighter, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, just let me explain," she begged. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around behind my back? That you brought him into our home, into our bedroom?" My voice rose with each word, the anger and betrayal bubbling to the surface. "How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking." "A mistake?" I turned my glare on Marco, who had pulled on his shirt and was fumbling to get his shoes. "Get out! Now!" Marco didn't argue. He bolted past me, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. The front door slammed, and then it was just Emily and me, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm cloud. She sobbed, clutching the sheet as if it could shield her from the truth. "David, I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me. I'll do anything to make this right." I couldn't look at her. Every memory of our life together, every shared laugh and promise, felt tainted. "Anything?" I asked bitterly. "You've already done enough." I turned and walked out of the room, her cries following me down the stairs. I needed space. I needed to think. But most of all, I needed to figure out if there was anything left of our marriage to salvage. I paced the living room, my thoughts a tangled mess. The anger burned hot and sharp, but beneath it, there was a deep ache, a hollow feeling that refused to go away. How had we ended up here? What had gone so wrong? Emily came downstairs after what felt like hours. She had changed into a simple dress, her face blotchy and red from crying. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed in her own house anymore. "David," she began softly, her voice breaking. "Please, can we talk?" I wanted to yell, to tell her there was nothing left to say. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I gestured toward the couch. "Sit." She obeyed, sitting on the very edge of the cushion, her hands clenched in her lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was suffocating. "Start from the beginning," I finally said. My voice was cold, detached, nothing like the way I used to speak to her. "I want to know everything." Emily nodded, her hands shaking. It wasn't planned," she said. "I didn't go looking for this, David. It just happened." "That's not an explanation," I snapped. "That's an excuse." She flinched, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then, I remembered the image of her and Marco in our bed, and the anger surged again. "It started a few months ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was spending so much time outside with the garden, and he was just there. He listened to me, David. He made me feel." "Don't," I cut her off, my hands balling into fists. "Don't you dare tell me this is about what he made you feel. I've been here, Emily. I've always been here." Tears streamed down her face. I know, and I hate myself for it. I didn't mean for it to go this far. And yet it did," I said bitterly. "You invited him into our home, into our bed. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She broke down, her sobs shaking her entire body. "I was stupid and selfish, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you, David. I love you so much, and I'll do anything to fix this." Her words felt like a cruel joke. "Do you even understand what you're asking?" I said, my voice cracking. "You want me to just forget? To pretend this never happened?" "No," she said quickly. "I don't expect you to forget. But I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I swear, I'll never see him again. You're damn right you won't," I said, standing abruptly. "Because he's gone. Fired. Effective immediately." Emily nodded, her tears flowing freely. "I'll tell him myself. I'll make sure he doesn't come back." "You'd better," I said. "Because if I ever see him again, I don't know what I'll do." She looked up at me, her face a mixture of hope and despair. "David, please. Tell me there's a chance. Tell me we can get through this." I wanted to tell her no, to walk out and never look back. But even in that moment, with everything shattered between us, I couldn't deny that a part of me still loved her. And that part, however small, stopped me from walking out the door. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff and my head pounding. I barely slept, tormented by the images and thoughts of what had happened. Emily must have stayed in our bedroom. I didn't check, nor did I care to. As I made coffee, the sound of quiet footsteps approached. Emily appeared in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were puffy, and she clutched a mug in her hands as if it were a lifeline. "I'll tell him today," she said quietly. "Marco. I'll make sure he knows he's never to come back here." I nodded curtly, focusing on pouring my coffee. "Good." She hesitated, as if waiting for me to say more, but I didn't. Eventually she retreated, leaving me alone in the silence. Around midday, Emily called Marco to meet her in the garden. I stayed inside, watching through the kitchen window. She stood stiffly, her arms crossed, as Marco approached. He looked nervous, glancing toward the house as if expecting me to charge out at any moment. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Emily's body language, tense and resolute. Marco gestured, pleading or explaining, but Emily shook her head firmly. After a few more words, Marco slumped, his defeat evident. He turned and walked away, not looking back as he disappeared through the garden gate. Emily stayed rooted in place for a while, her shoulders sagging as if the confrontation had drained her. Finally, she made her way back inside. "It's done," she said softly, standing in the doorway. "Good," I replied, my tone devoid of emotion. She lingered, her hands twisting together. "David, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to ask for another chance. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I just need to know if there's hope for us." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, I said nothing. How could there be hope after what she had done? But then, I thought about everything we had built together, the years of love, the life we shared. Was it all worth throwing away for one terrible mistake? "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I can't promise anything, Emily. Not yet." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. "I understand. I'll prove to you that I'm serious. I'll earn back your trust." I didn't respond, turning back to my coffee. Part of me wanted to believe her. The other part wasn't sure I could. That evening, Emily suggested we eat dinner together. I hesitated but ultimately agreed. It was better than more silence. We sat across from each other, the weight of everything unspoken filling the room. "I want you to know," she said, her voice trembling, "that I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. You mean everything to me, David." I didn't reply, focusing on my plate, but her words lingered, planting a small seed of hope in the barren field of my heart. The days that followed were a strange mix of routine and raw emotion. We carried on with our lives, work, meals, mundane conversations, but beneath it all, the weight of her betrayal pressed down like an invisible anchor. Emily threw herself into making amends. She cooked every meal, left small notes of apology around the house, and started looking into couples therapy. It was all so earnest. And yet, every time I looked at her, all I could see was her with him. One night, as I sat in the living room scrolling mindlessly on my phone, Emily approached cautiously, holding a small notebook. "I'd been writing everything down," she said, her voice soft. "What do you mean, everything?" "All the things I want to say to you but haven't. The things I feel. The reasons why I let this happen. I thought maybe, if you wanted to read it." I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "I don't need to read it, Emily. I lived it." She flinched, but she didn't leave. Instead, she sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the notebook like it was a shield. "I know I can't undo what I did, David. But I need you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was about me. My insecurities, my flaws. I was selfish and Her voice broke. "You don't think I know that?" I said bitterly. "You think I don't replay every moment in my head, wondering if I could have done something different? if I could have stopped this?" Her tears came then, silent and steady. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "It never was." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The quiet stretched between us like a chasm, and I wasn't sure how to bridge it. A week later, we had our first therapy session. Emily had found a well-reviewed counselor in town and made all the arrangements. I wasn't sure it would help, but I agreed to go. It felt like the least I could do to figure out if there was any way forward. The therapist, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Reed, started by asking us to share how we felt about the situation. Emily went first, her voice trembling as she laid everything bare: her guilt, her regret, her desire to rebuild what she had broken. It was painful to listen to, but also human. When it was my turn, the words came out harsher than I intended. "I feel betrayed," I said. "I feel like the life we built together doesn't mean anything anymore. And I don't know if I can forgive her. Ever." Emily winced but didn't interrupt. Dr. Reed nodded, her expression calm. "That's a valid feeling, David. And it's okay to sit with that for now. Forgiveness, if it comes, won't be immediate." The session continued, with Dr. Reed guiding us through questions and exercises designed to help us communicate better. By the end of it, I wasn't sure if we had made progress, but I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks, the faintest spark of hope. That night, as we lay in bed, her on her side, me on mine, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. "David?" Emily's voice broke the silence. "Yeah. Thank you for coming to therapy. It means more to me than you know." I didn't respond. But as I lay there, I found myself wondering if maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Therapy became a weekly routine. At first, it felt awkward and forced, like we were two strangers trying to navigate an unfamiliar script. But slowly, over the course of a few sessions, the tension between us began to ease. Dr. Reed had a way of asking questions that cut through the noise, forcing us to confront the heart of the matter. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Emily asked if we could take a walk together. The weather was crisp, and the golden light of sunset bathed the neighborhood in a soft glow. I hesitated but eventually nodded. We walked in silence for a while, our footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Emily fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, glancing at me nervously. "You don't have to say yes," she began, "but I was thinking, maybe we could start spending more time together, doing things we used to enjoy." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She gave a small, tentative smile. "Like cooking dinner together, or playing that ridiculous trivia game you always beat me at. I want us to have some good moments again. If you're willing." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to scoff, to tell her that no amount of trivia or cooking would erase what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that still remembered how much I used to love her, thought maybe it was worth trying. "Okay," I said finally. "We can try." Her face lit up, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. That weekend, Emily suggested we make dinner together. She pulled out a recipe for homemade pasta, something we hadn't made in years. I stood at the counter, rolling dough as she prepared the sauce, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was filled with laughter. "Careful, David," she teased, watching me fumble with the pasta cutter. "You're going to make ravioli the size of a pizza." "Maybe that's the goal," I shot back, grinning despite myself. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, of unspoken tension, but it was a start. That night, as we cleaned up the kitchen, Emily turned to me, her expression serious. "David, I know this doesn't fix everything, but tonight felt good. Thank you." I nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Yeah, it did." As she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to find our way back to each other. For a brief moment, it felt like things were getting better. Emily and I started sharing small parts of our lives again, things we used to take for granted, like sitting together with a cup of coffee in the mornings or working on the garden together. But as much as I wanted to believe we were moving forward, the wounds were still raw, and trust was a fragile thing. One evening, I came home later than usual from work. The house was quiet, the kitchen dark except for the faint glow of the oven light. Emily was at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face a mixture of guilt and determination. "What's all this?" I asked, setting my keys on the counter. She hesitated, biting her lip. "It's everything," she said finally. "The emails, the texts, everything between me and Marco. I wanted you to have full transparency." I stared at the stack of papers, unsure whether to be grateful or furious. Part of me didn't want to see it, didn't want the details. But another part, the part that still replayed her betrayal on a loop, needed answers. "Why now?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because you deserve to know everything," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to rebuild what we have, but I can't do that if I'm hiding anything from you." I sat down across from her, my chest tight. "Okay," I said, picking up the first page. "Let's see it." Reading through the messages was like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Most of them were mundane, flirty texts about garden work or casual jokes. But then came the ones that cut deep, the ones where Emily confided in Marco about her doubts, her frustrations with our marriage. Seeing her share parts of herself with him that were supposed to be mine was like a dagger to the heart. When I finally finished, I looked up at her. She was watching me, her hands clenched in her lap. "This is a lot," I said, my voice low. "Did you ever talk about leaving me?" Her eyes widened. "No. Never. I swear, David, I never wanted to leave you. It was a distraction?" I interrupted, bitterness creeping into my tone. "That's what it looks like. Like you used him to fill whatever gap you thought I wasn't filling." Her face crumpled. "I don't have an excuse for what I did," she said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But I never stopped loving you. That's the truth." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words replayed in my head. She never wanted to leave me. She still loved me. But was that enough? The next morning, I met with Dr. Reed alone. I needed clarity, some kind of direction. "Do you think people can come back from this?" I asked her. Dr. Reed leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "I think it depends on both of you," she said. "Healing from infidelity is one of the hardest things a couple can go through. It requires honesty, accountability, and a willingness to do the work on both sides. But ultimately, only you can decide if it's worth it. Sometimes I think it is," I admitted. "Other times, I don't even recognize the person I married." "That's normal," she said gently. "Trust takes time to rebuild, and it's okay to feel conflicted. What matters is whether you're willing to take the next step, whatever that may be." I left the session feeling more uncertain than ever. The days after Emily shared the messages were strained, each interaction tinged with the weight of what had been revealed. I found myself scrutinizing everything, her words, her actions, her tone, as if searching for hidden clues to her sincerity. It was exhausting, and I hated that this was now my reality. One evening, as we sat on the couch in awkward silence, Emily broke the stillness. "David, I've been thinking," she began, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should take a trip together. Somewhere neutral, where we can focus on us without all the noise here." "A trip?" I raised an eyebrow. You think a vacation is going to fix this? Not fix, she said quickly. But maybe remind us of what we had, what we still have, if we're willing to fight for it. I leaned back, crossing my arms. And if it doesn't? If all it does is remind me how broken things are? Emily looked down at her hands, her face falling. Then at least we tried, she said softly. Her suggestion lingered in my mind over the next few days. Part of me wanted to dismiss it outright. It felt too soon, too fragile. But another part of me wondered if it might help to get away from the reminders of her betrayal, to step outside the suffocating confines of our home. We decided on a quiet cabin by the lake, a place we had visited years ago, before life got complicated. The drive there was tense, filled with polite but distant conversation. The cabin was just as I remembered, simple, rustic, and surrounded by nature. The first day was uneventful. We unpacked, went for a short hike, and cooked dinner together. It felt like we were playing roles, pretending everything was fine while avoiding the deeper issues that hung between us. But on the second night, everything came to a head. We were sitting by the fireplace, the crackling flames the only sound in the room. Emily had brought out an old photo album, one from our early years together. Do you remember this? She asked, pointing to a picture of us at the lake, laughing as we tried to paddle a canoe. Yeah, I said, forcing a small smile. We nearly tipped over. She chuckled, but the laughter faded quickly. David, I miss this. I miss us. Her words opened a floodgate I hadn't realized was waiting. You miss it? Then why did you throw it all away? Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know. I was selfish and stupid, and I hate myself for it. But I've been trying, David. I've been doing everything I can to make it right. And what if it's not enough? I shot back, my voice rising. What if no matter how hard you try, I can't forget what you did? What you took from me? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what else to do except keep trying. Because I can't lose you. I can't. The raw emotion in her voice hit me like a punch to the gut. For the first time, I saw just how deeply she was hurting, not just for what she had done to me, but for what she had done to herself. I sat back, my own eyes burning. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly. But I know I don't want to give up. Not yet. Her head snapped up, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. You mean that? I don't know what's going to happen, I admitted. But if there's even a chance we can get through this, I'm willing to try. She nodded, her tears falling freely. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. The cabin trip didn't solve everything, but it gave us a starting point, a fragile understanding that neither of us was ready to give up entirely. When we returned home, the hard work began. Therapy became more intense, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationship. Dr. Reed introduced us to an exercise called Rebuilding the Foundation. We had to identify what had made our marriage strong before, and what had eroded it over time. It was brutal, but it was also enlightening. David, Dr. Reed said during one session, what did you need from Emily that you didn't get? The answer came reluctantly. I needed to feel like I mattered, I said. Like I wasn't just the guy paying the bills or fixing things around the house. I needed to feel like a partner, not an afterthought. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize you felt that way, she said. I was so wrapped up in my own insecurities that I didn't see what I was doing to you. And Emily, Dr. Reed continued, what did you need from David? She hesitated, glancing at me nervously. I needed to feel seen, she said finally. I needed to know that I still mattered to him, that I was more than just the woman who took care of the house. But instead of talking to him about it, I turned to Marco. Hearing her say it out loud hurt, but it also made me realize how much we had both failed each other in different ways. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them. Back at home, Emily threw herself into making changes, not just in our relationship, but in herself. She started seeing a therapist on her own, working through the insecurities and fears that had driven her to make such a terrible choice. She kept a journal, which she shared with me when she felt ready. "This is everything I've been working through," she said one evening, handing me the notebook. "You don't have to read it, but if you want to, it's all there." I didn't read it right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to see her raw, unfiltered thoughts. But one night, when I couldn't sleep, I opened it. The entries were heartbreaking. She wrote about her guilt, her regret, and her desperate hope that we could find a way forward. But she also wrote about the things she loved about me, the things she had taken for granted, the things she now realized she couldn't bear to lose. It was strange, seeing myself through her eyes. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me why I had loved her in the first place. As the weeks turned into months, we started finding small moments of joy again. We worked on the garden together, turning it into something new, something that didn't carry the weight of what had happened before. We started cooking dinner together more often, laughing as we experimented with new recipes. There were still bad days, of course. Days when the anger and hurt bubbled to the surface, threatening to undo all the progress we had made. But on those days, we talked. We fought through the pain instead of letting it consume us. One night, as we lay in bed, Emily reached for my hand. "David," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on us." I squeezed her hand, the words coming slowly but sincerely. "I'm not there yet," I admitted, "but I'm starting to believe that maybe we'll get there." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled. "That's all I need." A full year had passed since the day my world crumbled. It wasn't a clean process, putting the pieces back together, far from it. Some days were messy, filled with arguments and tears. Others brought quiet reflection and the smallest glimmers of hope. If someone had told me a year ago that Emily and I would be sitting here today, rebuilding what we nearly lost, I wouldn't have believed them. But here we were. One evening, as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed how much the garden had changed. What had once been a pristine but lifeless patch of land now brimmed with vibrancy. Emily had planted beds of tulips, daffodils, and lavender, transforming the space into something alive, untamed, and beautiful. The sight struck me. It was as if the garden mirrored our journey. "Hey!" I called as I stepped outside. Emily was kneeling in the dirt, her hands caked with soil, planting a new row of flowers. She glanced up and smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're home early." I crouched beside her, reaching for the spare trowel. Couldn't resist lending a hand. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of digging and planting oddly soothing. It reminded me of the early days of our marriage, when we'd tackle projects together just for the joy of it. After finishing the row, Emily sat back on her heels and let out a satisfied sigh. "It's starting to feel like ours again," she said, looking at the garden. "Yeah," I agreed. "It looks amazing. You've done a great job." She turned to me, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "David, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through. I know I can't undo the pain I caused, but thank you. Thank you for giving us a chance to find this again." Her words were raw, and they cut through any remaining barriers in my heart. I nodded, my throat tight. "I wasn't sure we'd make it," I admitted. "But you've shown me every day that you're willing to fight for us. And I am too." Emily's lips trembled as tears spilled over, but she was smiling, a smile of relief, gratitude, and something deeper. Do you think we'll ever be the same? I shook my head, a soft smile tugging at my lips. No, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this time will be better. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. For a moment, the world fell away, leaving just the two of us in this fragile but hopeful space. Over the next few weeks, the changes in our relationship began to solidify. The tentative trust we had started to rebuild grew stronger with every shared moment, every honest conversation. Therapy had become less about healing the wounds of the past and more about building a future. One evening, Emily surprised me with a small dinner party. Just the two of us, candles flickering on the patio table, the scent of lavender drifting in from the garden. I wanted to do something special, she said as she poured wine into our glasses. To celebrate how far we've come. I raised an eyebrow, smirking. You mean to celebrate the fact that I can finally trust you with a trowel again? She laughed, swatting my arm lightly. I mean to celebrate us. The fact that we're still here trying. We clinked glasses, the sound ringing softly in the night air. As we ate, we talked, not just about us, but about life, plans, dreams. It felt normal. And for the first time in a long time, that normalcy didn't feel like something I had to force. After dinner, we sat on the porch swing, watching the stars. Emily rested her head on my shoulder, her hand slipping into mine. David, she said quietly, I'll never stop trying to make this right. You mean everything to me. I turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've already shown me that, Emily. And I believe you. The words felt like a release, a letting go of the anger and doubt I had carried for so long. It wasn't that everything was perfect, far from it. But for the first time, I could see a future where the love we shared wasn't defined by her mistake, but by how we overcame it. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, the garden flourished. Every flower, every blade of grass felt like a testament to the effort we had poured into it and into each other. One evening, as I walked through the rows of flowers, I found Emily standing at the edge of the garden, staring at the sunset. It's beautiful, I said, stepping beside her. She turned to me, her smile soft. It really is. But you know what's even better? What's that? She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. The fact that we're standing here together. I smiled, pulling her close. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in a warm golden glow, I realized something. The past would always be a part of us, but it didn't have to define us. The love we had rebuilt was stronger, more honest, and more resilient than before. And just like the garden, it would continue to grow.